So tonight we're learning more about James Dicus. He's the man accused of decapitating his wife. The two had only been married a few months.
Visitors consoled each other at the growing memorial for Angie Diaz this evening outside of the meat market where she'd worked for the last 3 years until Wednesday.
It began on a quiet Friday afternoon in Waller County, Texas. A place where time seemed to move slower, where families knew one another by name, and where the sound of church bells still carried across open fields. But that calm was shattered the moment a call came through to the sheriff's office from a small home on Oak Hollow Drive. The voice on the other end was trembling, an older man, his words breaking apart between sobs. "It's my son. Something terrible's happened. It's his wife." When deputies arrived, the scene was so still it felt unnatural. The front door was half open, the winter air drifting through. Inside, the smell of iron and something unspoken filled the space, heavy, suffocating. The home looked ordinary at first glance, a small living room with a couch, a cross hanging above it, wedding photos lining the mantel. In those photos, a young couple smiled beneath string lights, her hand in his, a promise captured forever. But in the kitchen, that promise had been destroyed. What officers found would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Angie Dicus, Angie Hendricks before marriage, just 21 years old, lay lifeless. Her body had been desecrated and her head was missing. The crime scene told a story no one wanted to believe, not in a small Texas town, not by the hands of someone she loved. Moments later, officers stepped outside to question the father who had called 911. His face was pale, his body shaking. "He came to me," the man said. "He told me he did it." His son, 21-year-old Jared James Dicus, had confessed to killing his wife. Within minutes, deputies located Jared nearby. He was calm, eerily calm. There was no struggle, no attempt to run. He admitted everything. He said it happened suddenly. He said he loved her, but nothing in his words could reconcile the brutality of what he'd done. Neighbors gathered on their porches as the young man was led away in handcuffs. Many had seen the couple days earlier, laughing, walking their dog, talking about Christmas plans. They had only been married 3 months. To them, Jared and Angie were just another small-town love story. Two young people finding their footing in life. But beneath the surface, something had been unraveling for weeks. As investigators processed the scene, they noticed signs of an argument, a tipped-over chair, a cracked phone screen, blood splatter extending toward the door. It was sudden, it was violent, and it was personal. Over the next 48 hours, details began to surface. The two had met years earlier, both from the same rural community. Angie was known for her warmth, her love of animals, and her bright spirit. She had dreams of working with children, of building a simple life surrounded by family. Jared had grown up quiet, often described as polite but withdrawn. He worked various local jobs, occasionally helping his parents at their small business. They married in October of 2022. A backyard ceremony beneath oak trees, surrounded by friends and family. Photos from that day painted a picture of happiness. Angie in her white dress, Jared in a vest and jeans, both smiling as they danced barefoot in the grass. But behind that joy, those closest to them sensed something shifting. Jared had grown increasingly erratic in the months leading up to the wedding. He was drinking more, talking about spiritual darkness, and isolating himself. After the wedding, Angie's friends noticed bruises on her arms, excuses about accidents, and messages that sounded increasingly worried. One friend later told investigators that Angie had confided she felt unsafe but didn't want to embarrass her family. "He's not himself," she'd said. "He gets lost in his head, like something takes over." On the night of the murder, Jared returned home from his parents' place. Investigators would later confirm he had been drinking heavily. Something sparked an argument. No one knows exactly what. Maybe jealousy, maybe money, maybe something deeper. But in that moment, everything exploded. Inside that kitchen, Jared grabbed a sharp object, believed to be a kitchen knife, and attacked Angie in a frenzy. The act was over within minutes, but its horror would echo for years. Afterwards, in a haze that seemed detached from reality, Jared did the unthinkable. He mutilated her body and walked to his parents' house nearby, where he confessed. When deputies arrived, they found evidence scattered across both homes: blood-stained clothes, the weapon, and signs of mental collapse. At the sheriff's office, Jared sat faceless during questioning. When asked why, he offered no real answer. "It just happened," he said. "I lost control." His eyes, according to officers present, were distant, like someone speaking from a dream. Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry later told reporters it was one of the most gruesome cases his department had ever seen. "It's something you can't prepare for," he said. "We've handled murders before, but nothing like this." As word spread, the small community was shaken to its core. People who had attended their wedding just months earlier couldn't comprehend what had happened. Churches held vigils for Angie. Friends flooded social media with photos and memories, describing her as a light in dark times. One post read, "She loved everyone. She didn't deserve this." Meanwhile, Jared's family was consumed by disbelief. Their son, whom they had raised in that same community, were left to face an unimaginable reality. Their son had murdered his wife. In the days that followed, they cooperated with investigators. Their home turned into part of a crime scene. Psychological evaluations began to assess Jared's mindset. Some wondered if mental illness played a role. Others pointed to alcohol, jealousy, or rage. But the facts were clear. He knew what he'd done, and he confessed without hesitation. Months passed as the case made its way through the Texas court system. Prosecutors worked carefully, mindful of the horror of the crime and the community's demand for justice. They sought a punishment that reflected both the brutality of the act and the youth of the offender. In court, family members sat behind rows of benches, Angie's relatives on one side, Jared's on the other. There were no outbursts, just tears and the heavy silence of people bound together by tragedy. As evidence was presented, photos from the crime scene were shown, blurred for the public but devastating for those in the room. Investigators testified about Jared's confession. The medical examiner described the extent of the injuries. Each word felt like reopening a wound. When given a chance to speak, Jared's attorney described him as a man broken by addiction and mental decline. But the prosecution reminded the court of Angie's last moments, the terror she must have felt, the life cut short. After hours of testimony and deliberation, Jared entered a plea agreement. In August 2024, nearly 2 years after the crime, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of his wife, Angela. He accepted the plea, showing little reaction as the sentence was read. There was no appeal for sympathy, only a final acknowledgement of what he'd done. Outside the courtroom, Angie's family stood together, their faces lined with grief but also relief. Justice, in some form, had been served. "No amount of years will bring her back," one relative said, "but at least she can rest now." For the Dicus family, it was a day of reckoning. They had lost a son in every sense of the word. In the months after his incarceration, Jared reportedly expressed regret and confusion, often telling jail staff he didn't remember everything from that night. But for Angie's family, remorse could never erase the damage. The home where the crime occurred was sold quietly months later. Neighbors say they still avoid walking past it at night. The small community of Waller County has since tried to move forward, but the story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly love can turn into tragedy. Angie is remembered not for the way she died, but for the way she lived, kind, forgiving, and full of promise. Her friends have since created scholarships in her name, supporting young women pursuing counseling and education. They say it's what she would have wanted, to help others heal even after her own pain. Jared, now serving his sentence in a Texas prison, will be eligible for parole in his 60s. By then, decades will have passed, decades in which families on both sides have carried scars that time may never fully heal. Those who knew them both still replay the what-ifs. What if someone had noticed the warning signs sooner? What if Angie had left that night instead of staying? What if Jared had sought help before it was too late? But the past cannot be rewritten. In the end, the story of Jared and Angie Dicus stands both as a tragedy and a warning, a reminder that love without peace or healing can turn dangerous when shadowed by addiction, control, and emotional collapse. Today, the quiet street in Waller County looks normal again. Children play outside, the hum of life returns. But behind one of those doors, memories linger of a wedding that should have been a beginning and of a crime that tore two families apart. And in the silence that follows, the truth remains. Justice was served, but peace came at a price no one was ready to pay. Thank you for watching.